Hey everyone, thanks for joining us. I'm Josh Goding. I'm here with my friend Tyler Smith. And today we're going to be talking about Stanley Kubrick's epic film 2001, A Space Odyssey. 2001 is a classic sci-fi film. If you have not seen the movie, this may not be the show for you. Tyler and I have seen it several times each, probably several dozen times, I might venture to say.
Spoiler alert!
And indeed, yes, we will be getting heavily into spoilers, talking about the plot and giving away lots of things. So if you haven't seen the movie, this may not be the show for you. Check in with us after you watch 2001. That being said, we have a lot to talk about. It's a fantastic film.
I think it's a masterpiece. I think it's, you know, Kubrick, when the purpose he made this movie was he wanted to make the best science fiction movie of all time. You know, when he sat down to do this. And I think at the time he actually succeeded. It was the best science fiction movie of all time when it came out. I think Blade Runner was the one movie that topped it. You know? But I mean, that was 1982.
You think it still stands alone in the field of science fiction?
Oh yeah, it stands, it's watermark. It's one of the very best. It's kind of like Citizen Kane, you know? It raised the bar and other people went to surpass it.
It's in my top 10, definitely. And I know, like you said, Kubrick set out to make a great science fiction film. He looked for collaborators that were giants in the field of science and science fiction.
So Arthur C. Clarke and Douglas Trumbull, too.
And they consulted with Carl Sagan and other people like that.
Yeah.
And they set out to make a movie that changed a lot during its production, and especially post-production. I read stories about how it became more and more non-verbal as time went on, but we can get into
and non-linear, too.
If you're not on this movie's wavelength, you are going to be bored to tears. This could be the most boring movie of all time.
Oh, yeah. Well, a lot of people have called it boring and incomprehensible. You know, I saw this YouTube video where this young kid went on for like 20 minutes about why he hates Stanley Kubrick and 2001 Space Odyssey. But the bottom line was, you have a 10-second attention span. For you, this movie is going to be torture. Yeah. It's really going to be
next
painful.
Explosion.
Yeah. Well, the thing is you know, he complained that the docking sequence took 10 minutes. You know, and that's the whole idea of savoring the experience rather than rushing it. And that's one of the things I love about this movie. It does that. And the courage it takes to do that.
You give yourself over to the pacing of the movie, I think you can then become completely
enamored,
caught up, and you really appreciate it.
One of the reasons I wanted to do this show, let me tell you something. Up to that point, you know, the great science fiction films were like Journey to the Moon, King Kong, Invisible Man, Time Machine, Forbidden Planet. But none of these movies, even as respected as they were big box office hits.
Weren't these like creature feature kind of monster movies, basically?
Most sci-fi movies were movies for $100,000 to make $200,000. You know, giant bugs that had gone radioactive that grew and attacked everything. Bubblegum movies, you know, junk food, you know, but fun for what they were, but they, you know, not great art. But this was a movie with real issues, with real story. What was your favorite scene in there, Josh?
I've got a lot of favorite scenes, but I think the ones that really stand out are kind of the outer space scenes with the planetary conjunctions, and it's just music.
Where they savor that, you know, instead of rushing it. You know, it's like it's a ballet of these spaceships in outer space with the music.
I think I saw this movie, I want to say it was 1984. I would have been 10 years old, and I think my dad showed it to me on home Betamax or something. By the time, I thought it was a little slow and strange when the Dawn of Man sequence started with the apes and the monolith. By the time I was done watching it, I felt like the top of my head had been lifted off and something
had been implanted in there. Yeah.
I left with the sense that not only did I realize how important media, especially films, were to human beings and making us feel something and understand something that's beyond words, but also I was certain that I wanted to have a life in media and become a filmmaker, or at least a film wannabe, which I still am. And this was the movie. This was one of the ones that really transformed me.
But think about how groundbreaking this movie is for a moment. Let's talk about that. I mean, the story takes place over 1.5 million years. And we go from the dawn of man, primitive man, to the space age in 1 second. You know, with the scene with the bones thrown up in the air.
Famous
how daring
match cut.
How daring, innovative, original, and brilliant is that scene? And you know, most stories take place over a few days, few weeks, few months, few years. You know, this story takes place over 1.5 million years.
Yeah. You were telling me earlier that the effects you see in 2001 are exemplary, and they're even maybe better than a lot of stuff.
Well, I think they're better than what we're seeing now. You know, I don't think they've been beat to this day because they don't spend the time, the money, and the care, because they had to draft every little part out of the Discovery 1, hand build it, hand glue it in, fit it together. You know, you don't see that anymore. You know, when they did Alien, the Nostromo was kit bashed, actually. Now understand, it still took them like...
Explain what that means.
Okay, kit bashing is when you take model kits like of aircraft carriers, battleships, race cars, whatever, tanks, airplanes, and you take the little pieces, you cut them up, and you glue them to the outside of the spaceship to give it its texture.
Right.
Now, that saved them a lot of money. This was first developed by Douglas Trumbull, who did the special effects for 2001 and Silent Running, which he directed. But they did it because they didn't have the budget for 2001. This was a science fiction B movie. You know, necessity being the mother of invention. You know, they're like, okay, let's just go to the model store and just, you know, buy some model kits and glue it to the outside. You know, we'll call it a spaceship. And it worked.
Yeah.
It wasn't as good as 2001. And this was the first time they did that. 2001 was 1968, right before the moon landings. And you understand, the movie got made because we were going to land a man on the moon. See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So Hollywood saw an opportunity here.
I see.
It's like we're gonna have this movie come out right before the moon landings. You know, when people are all excited about it. It's hot. It's a hot topic, and they hope to ride in with the moon landings to make a ton of money. And financially they failed, but artistically the movie was a huge success. You know, but the thing is without 2001 there would have been no Silent Running. Without Silent Running there would have been no Star Wars. And Star Wars basically took science fiction from the sewer to the pedestal. You know, it took it from the bottom genre to the top. I mean, 1968 when they made this film, science fiction was considered box office poison.
Yeah.
Don't do it unless you're going to do it like a little low-budget kiddie film.
That's too bad. That was 2000, or that was MGM also, I think.
Yeah.
There's some funny stories about how MGM was notorious for pirating sets and props of earlier movies and making new movies. Yeah. You see Robbie the Robot appearing in 30 iterations.
The Invisible Boy.
Right. And so
Lost in Space.
Kubrick was desperate to not have this happen, I guess.
Yeah.
He made sure that
there was no conglomeration from earlier stuff in there.
He didn't want to see the Discovery, in some B movie flying through space on a wire. And
And they spent $168 million on this film. And, when you spend that much money, you spend at least as much advertising distributing it. So they were like, no science fiction movie had even made $40 million. So they're dumping in over $300 million into this project. If you count advertising and distribution on top of that, which doubles the price tag. And then the movie made about $30 million, in its release, So from a box office standpoint, the movie was a disaster. But from an artistic standpoint, people were hailing it as a masterpiece.
Yeah, well, it's also been very divisive, I think. People fall very strongly on one side or another of hating it or loving it.
Yeah, I loved the film. You loved it too. But that's one thing I love about 2001, the fact that it savors the experience instead of rushing it. And how many movies do that ever,
And more than that, I think
and this is slow even for 1968 standards, in terms of its pacing.
I think it tries to transport you inside the movie. I mean, that's the only way I can think of what they were trying to do with that.
Well, by slowing down time as you're going through scenes, it gives you a heightened sense of reality. You see what I'm saying? That you're really there.
Yeah. It plays with time and space in a way that few movies do. I can't think of really any other that take that much time.
Most movies you watch, you enjoy them in the moment, and then it washes from your consciousness minutes after walking out of the theater.
Yeah.
this one stays with you for your lifetime.
Yeah, it does.
You know, I mean, how many films can you say about that has that level of impact on a person?
It's something that I try to go back and watch every couple of years, and every time I watch it, I find that I'm a different person, so I'm seeing it differently a little bit, and understanding more, but also the mystery is ever present.
Well, the thing was when I saw the movie, I had my own interpretation. And other people had their own interpretations. Then we had a discussion about why we thought this and why we thought that. But it was intended to present you with information, and then you come up with your own conclusion. So I went out, I read the book, so I could get answers that the movie didn't give me. And the thing was I was just shocked at how off my interpretation was.
I see.
From what was in the book. I thought the monoliths represented gods. I didn't realize they represented space aliens. I completely missed that. Because you don't see any space aliens in the film.
Some
you
people
just see the monoliths.
interpret it as like Bowman defeating Hal is allegory for how human beings have to shed the military-industrial complex in order to achieve enlightenment or something like that.
Yeah, you know, that's an interesting interpretation. But the thing is that's what's the brilliant thing about the movie, is that because it's an ink blot, your description of the movie isn't about what the movie's about. You discover who you are about.
Yeah, that's
the genius of it.
You're invited to participate in this movie as a co-creator of the meaning, I think.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's why I was so sucked into it. That's why it stayed with me for so long.
Critics have accused it of being a little bit sterile, kind of a cold vision, and the human beings in it, possibly by the intent of the creators of the film, act sort of more robotic than Hal even, and the dialogue is sort of dry.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting because Hal, who shows very little emotion, shows more emotion than the astronauts.
That's right.
But the thing is I was actually a NASA brat. I lived on Cocoa Beach. I watched the Apollo missions from my backyard fly up to the moon. Now, I know firsthand, I talked with the astronauts. I knew their kids. I hung out with their kids. I was friends with their kids. I knew the people in the space program.
Okay.
And the way David Bowman acts and talks and behaves is 100% accurate for that time of what these guys were like. You see, the engineers programmed Hal to see to the safety of the crew, to honestly tell the crew what is going on and give them good feedback to carry out the mission.
Yeah.
You know, so the politicians snuck in at night, and they reprogrammed Hal to lie because they're used to lying.
They wanted Hal to
not tell the crew the truth
about what was happening on
what the real mission of the ship was. And it also told Hal that its #1 priority was to get to Jupiter and make contact with these aliens. All other priorities are secondary. And Hal interpreted that, okay, I can't tell the crew the truth about Jupiter, the real mission, until we get there, and they're about to unplug me. So the only way I can carry out the mission to go to Jupiter is to kill the entire crew.
So they had set up a logic error, like a bug in Hal.
Yeah, and Hal, and he became neurotic.
And suddenly, it's not out of the question to take human life in order to protect what he sees as the higher purpose of the mission.
Of the mission, And the movie doesn't explain that at all. No, but they explain it in the book a little bit. You know, it's only a paragraph, but in that paragraph, I got it. You know,
in the movie, you only get, no 9000 has ever been turned off before, and I'm not sure how he would feel about it.
Well, no, it's failed before.
Yeah.
So there's no reason to turn it off.
Right.
You know, it's like it's got to be human error. It's always human error. You know,
and that's when you have the suspense of seeing Hal reading their lips.
Yeah. I thought that was genius. You know, it's like, oh my God, their computer is turning on them. You know, it's like the level of paranoia, suspicion, and distrust and plotting has slided over to artificial intelligence. That's a frightening thought.
I must say that Jupiter section, it plays like a slightly different movie almost, with the tension and the horror elements of it. It feels like a different movie, and then by the time we're in the Infinity and Beyond or whatever.
That's a different movie too.
Yeah, it's just like,
but they all weave together. They all work, though. That's the amazing thing about it.
Yeah.
the movie was actually based on an Arthur C. Clarke short story, where the astronauts go to the moon. They find a radio on the moon that's buried under the moon. They dig it up. They break it down, and then they stop sending the signal back to its original planet. And that was the inspiration for 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Right.
Originally, there are tiny probes that are sent out. This was in the original script, by the way, that are about the size of my finger, or even smaller, the size of like a pin. And if they find something interesting, then they start replicating themselves till they're the size of the monolith. And then they send a signal back that we found something interesting. But that was the first 20 pages of the original script. And that got completely cut out. You know, it wasn't even shot. So that was the idea, and it was a scenario come up by scientists that, okay, if we were to explore, someone else was to explore, we'd probably send out a whole bunch of tiny probes, and then if they found something interesting, they would replicate themselves to make themselves bigger at that point, and then send a signal back to us.
There's a story about how when Kubrick set out to start writing 2001 to make this epic, that he didn't know what the story was going to be yet. He contacted Arthur C. Clarke, who was one of the greatest sci-fi writers of all time, and Arthur Clarke was excited to work with this eccentric person.
Brilliant.
Who was brilliant and who arguably was not... 2001 elevated him as one of the greatest filmmakers of all time, I think.
Oh, yeah,
Before
absolutely.
that, he was just an auteur, but maybe not.
He was considered one of the best filmmakers of his day and of all time, even up to that point. But he wanted to.
He didn't have too many epics under his belt, though.
You know, but he was starting to get into his stride at that point.
Arthur Clarke was writing his novel of the movie at the same time, roughly, that the 2001 was being made. And it changed a little bit as Clarke was seeing rushes from the daily production and stuff. And at some point, the plot diverges a little bit between 2001, The Space Odyssey, the movie, and the 2001, the book. I also have read the book. And it has a lot more answers. There's a lot less mystery about the nature of the monolith. And
well, one thing that amazed me about the book was it gets into a lot of stuff that isn't even in the movie at all. Like about as they're passing by the planets and they're sending probes down to find, to discover things about these planets as they're passing by them. That's completely
and you
out of the movie, Sort
of the problem of having all the answers is you think, oh, that's what it is? Well, that's helpful, but now it's limited my...
It's not as exciting as when I didn't understand it,
Now it's this and it's not all of this.
Yeah.
So in the movie, the mystery is much wider and it's very nonverbal, and you really don't get anyone telling you, certainly not any characters telling you this is what's going on. But I guess those guys, Clarke and Kubrick, they consulted Carl Sagan, the astrophysicist at the time.
Let's not have any illusions. The amount of talent that went into this movie was gigantic.
Well, they asked Sagan what he thought alien life might be like, because Kubrick wanted to depict, he thought he might do some alien masks and these, beings. And so Sagan said, I think that the interstellar race, or a race that's capable of interstellar travel, very likely may not even have biological bodies anymore.
Yeah.
They may have had to give them up.
Because that's what I saw. That's what I read into it. You see what I'm saying? As I was watching the film, they were like beings that didn't have bodies, but were like a pure consciousness. They'd gone to the next evolutionary level. And when David Bowman dies and then was being reborn as the Star Child, he's joining them as like being a pure consciousness. He's gone to the next evolutionary level up from that. That was how I read it.
So you sort of have these non-physical shepherds of evolution in the galaxy that are helping these child races get to the next step.
Get to the next level, yeah.
Which is, their destiny perhaps to leave, or it's our destiny perhaps to evolve so much that we leave our bodies and we go into space as these spirits, and then, the monolith becomes our tool or something. But
it becomes our Stargate, To this day, amongst actors, there's still that nervousness of doing science fiction. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that they're afraid they're going to become props that revolve around the special effects. And the mistake most people make when they do science fiction is they get so caught up in the technology that they forget to add the drama to the story. Kubrick did that in 2001. Now, he did it in a very unique and original way, because it's the arc of humanity over 1.5 million years.
Yeah.
but he did it. 2001 was about the void of space. It was about the loneliness and isolation of space. And how tiny we really are, and how insignificant we are on this tiny little planet rolling around the solar system. And what a huge step this is for us to get even to this point.
He's dealing with these universal themes, which is probably good. You've probably heard the stories about sort of the Cold War subplots that have been cut out from the original versions of the film.
Yeah, it was in there a little bit where the Russians are on the moon with us, and there's a little tension there,
And then the match cut from the bone going up in the air to these satellites.
It's actually a nuclear weapon. It's a weapon of war.
These suborbital nuclear launching platforms.
Yeah.
So the United States and Russia at the time
have their own.
About ready to blow each other up, or there's some sort of stalemate anyway.
Yeah.
And at the end, you have the Star Child. This is in the book, I think.
Yeah.
The Star Child goes and blows up these satellites and saves the Earth from nuclear war. Now, you don't get any of that in the movie because, one, Kubrick wanted to distance himself from Dr. Strangelove and anything about nuclear bombs.
So,
He didn't want the associations made.
There's a backlash. There's actually a 2001 backlash in science fiction most people don't know about. And that is, even in the industry, even amongst science fiction writers, okay, it worked in 2001, the ballet where we savor the experience of the spaceships floating around and we put it to classical music.
Right.
But even the best and brightest of that say, okay, that's good, but we can't do that anymore. We just can't do it. And the reason we can't do it is because we could do it when we landed a man on the moon. It was appropriate for that time. But it's not appropriate now. Space travel is just too common now.
Which begs the question, what is appropriate now? Sucker punch? Or?
No. The reason you can't have a long sequence like you have in 2001, and I love watching this movie, and I love the fact that they take their time, where we just watch the ships float around, the whole ballet. It goes on and on, no dialogue. I love these sequences. I can still watch it today, but you can't do that today because you need character development. You see, Hollywood finally, this happened as an offshoot, actually not of 2001, but of Silent Running.
Okay.
After 1972, every time they made a science fiction movie, they sat down, watched Silent Running. I'm not kidding. Blade Runner, The Matrix, Star Wars, all of them. And they said, okay, when we do a science fiction film, what we're doing is a drama set in a science fiction backdrop.
That's right.
And we're going to have three-dimensional characters, and we're going to have identifiable characters. We're going to have regular Joes that the average audience member can relate to. This is also an offshoot of 2001 where they said, we can't relate to these guys. We can't relate to David Bowman.
You don't feel anything necessarily for Frank Poole, is it, when you see him, his body flying by?
Because you don't relate to him as a real person.
To know him, yeah.
He's such a minority because they train these guys to be emotionless and intellectual. And that's the way they were. But the whole thing was, in Silent Running, okay, future, Joe Blow is now an astronaut. Space travel is common. So you don't have geniuses, you have average guys. Like the guys working on the ships, who are in the merchant marines. You see what I'm saying? They're average guys now that are doing this. So that was the whole idea, the truckers in space thing that they did with Silent Running first, then Alien second. And every time they made a science fiction movie, they did it the same way. They have a used future, not the brand new shiny future of 2001, but ships that have wear and tear to them.
With smog damage on things. And
yeah, exactly. And dirt on the floors, and things break down. It's a used, worn future.
Right.
Even in Star Wars, you look at the kitchen, in Tatooine. That has some wear and tear in it. It's not all brand new.
Yeah.
But it looks real. It looks right. It looks, exactly, a lived-in universe. And that was Silent Running's answer to 2001. We want to show wear and tear. We want a used universe. We want something that looks right. We want people that you can identify and relate to, and we're going to do a drama first in a science fiction backdrop. And you see that even in Outland, where you have to understand something.
It's like a Western.
Yeah, well, it's really high noon in outer space. But it's a drama that's about people that's set in a science fiction backdrop. And they keep all the spaceship shots in that, the special effects shots, short.
Yeah.
And
that's why
not for the attention span reason.
The structure is there, and so the storytelling works even as the movie ages and the special effects aren't so keen anymore.
Yeah.
It still is engaging. It's still
but it works as a drama, and that's what science fiction movies have become.
Yes.
And that's why 2001 is so unique, because it's really just an absolutely maverick original film that no one has imitated because I think they don't know how to. They don't have the courage to. I mean,
2001: Space Odyssey has been praised for some of its scientific accuracies in the depiction of like the physics of space, what it's like to be in space, the experience of space. What do you think about that?
Well, yeah, that is absolutely correct. There's that scene with David Bowman goes into the escape pod to get back into the ship when he's fighting Hal. And when he jettisons, there's no noise during that scene because the void of space, you can't hear any noise. It's not until he gets to the lever, pulls it down, and closes the door, and air fills up in the room, do you actually hear noise in that sequence. And yes, that is 100% scientifically accurate. But it's interesting because most filmmakers who do science fiction, they don't care about that.
Right.
You know, it's like what George Lucas said.
It's not dramatic to have it silent.
Yeah. George Lucas says, I have explosions in space. I know there's a void in space. I know you can't hear explosions. But it's dramatic, and it sells tickets. So this is a business. Pew, pew. Bottom line, you know? And, you know, it's interesting because in Silent Running, they did that. They knew that. And they had explosions in outer space that had noise with the explosion. They did that intentionally.
Yeah.
But they said, once we do that, we have to be consistent in it. You know, you can't have a noise one moment with that and not with another.
I see.
You know, so it's like if you make a rule like that where you're breaking the rule, you have to be consistent in the rule that you break.
It was also one of the first movies, space movies, to ever have actors on wires to depict weightlessness.
Yes, it was.
And then also the centrifuge that you mentioned.
like the Ferris wheel that was the spaceship where they're
intended to create artificial gravity inside the
Discovery One
ship, equivalent to the moon's gravity, is what the research said, so that they wouldn't just be floating around in the control room. There'd be a little bit of gravity holding them down. Yeah,
but the thing is if you have a spaceship and you have a part of it spinning like that inside the spaceship, that would create artificial gravity, at least a little bit, so you could walk around in there. So that was scientifically accurate.
Yeah.
You know?
The movie also had some scientific inaccuracies. People have commented about or complained about certain conjunctions of planets and moons that would never actually happen.
Well, the thing is
some
also
dramatic liberties that
they didn't show the engines firing on the Discovery 1 because they didn't have the technology to do that back then. They just have it floating without the engines firing.
And apparently little things like the way dust on the moon works wouldn't be that way. There's no air atmosphere, or the way the sunlight hits the ships and then diffuses over the side, it wouldn't quite
be that way.
Go that way, but
it's way more accurate than most other science fiction movies.
Yeah.
And Kubrick did make a genuine effort to research that and try to make it basically at least accurate. You see what I mean? And then that's something we don't see anymore, you know?
And when you see it, it feels real, and the lack of sound, I think, is enough of a shock to make you sit up and kind of pay closer attention.
Yeah.
Where are they going with this?
Yeah.
Let's talk very briefly about the sort of lukewarm sequel.
2010.
Came out in the 80s.
Yeah.
I don't recall the director. I recall John Lithgow and Roy Scheider being in it.
Yeah.
That's about all I remember. I remember there being a lot of answers. I know it's directly off the book 2010 by a Clark.
Yeah, this was really kind of a bubblegum movie, really. It didn't take place over 1.5 million years like the original. This takes place like over about a year.
This is very much sort of a dated Cold War plot.
Yeah, a Cold War plot. And the ending was almost David Lynch-like in its silliness, you know? One person called it warmed over Gandhi. You know, funny ending to this, where the aliens tell us, live together, live in peace. Hey, why don't you guys just be nice to each other and not kill each other? And they're like, hey, what do we think of that? Sure, let's give each other a hug.
Right. And by the way, don't go to Europa. So Jupiter becomes the sun. We figure out what happened to Hal. And all these worlds are given to the people of the Earth to colonize. And it just kind of, there's so many more answers in 2001, and yet it's so much more unsatisfying as a film.
Yeah. That's the same problem we were talking about earlier. The movie gave us answers. But they were stupid answers, but they were answers. Whereas Kubrick's like, you look at his movies, no, he gives you the questions. He's not telling you what to think. He's giving you the questions so you can think for yourself. And he does that in Full Metal Jacket. He does that in 2001, Clockwork Orange.
It seems to panic a modern audience, that idea of you have to participate in this a little bit.
Huh?
Yeah. Huh? We're being asked to think. I just want to chew more popcorn while this is spoon-fed to me. So.
Yeah. Well, the sequel was just abysmal as far as I'm concerned. It really was terrible.
Yeah, it was a real letdown. For what was arguably one of the greatest movies of all time, the sequel is certainly
It was one of the lamest follow-ups of all time. You know. And the thing was the special effects in there. The kindest thing I could say about the sequel is that they at least explain why Hal went nuts. That's the kindest thing I could say about the sequel. The second kindest thing I could say about the sequel is they were actually able to get the engines of the Discovery 1 to fire using computer-generated images. They figured it out finally.
That's sort of like an inside joke between filmmakers, right? I mean, to have that be in the movie.
Yeah. They finally fired the engines of the Discovery 1. To the sci-fi geeks like myself who read Starlog magazine, it's like we're the only ones who get this. The average filmmaker, it's like, huh? It's nothing to them. They don't even get it.
And so then, by picking up the Cold War threads that are just hinted at in 2001, the movie.
Yeah.
It immediately becomes dated.
The main theme.
And it dates itself with the fall of the Berlin Wall or
which
whatever.
Comes shortly after that, yeah.
It's suddenly no longer relevant, and it feels a lot farther away from. The actual 2010 feels a lot farther away from the movie than the 2001 of the movie did.
Well, the thing is also about the Russians in there. The Russians were caricatures of Russians. I've talked with people who are Russians, who I've known in Fairfield, and they're far more interesting.
Yeah.
They're far more flushed out as real people than the characters in this. They were caricatures. They were
just like vodka swilling Cossacks or something.
Yeah. They weren't even that interesting. It was really too bad.
What is it, Deus Machina, where the machinery of the divine or the supreme being comes in and saves humanity at the last minute.
And it's ridiculous.
Yeah,
it is stupid.
Well, great. So we have to wait for alien intelligence, the mercy of an alien intelligence 10,000 times more powerful than us, to save us from something.
Well, the thing is it's like if I was an alien, of great intelligence, it's like, if these idiots over here are dumb enough to destroy themselves, we want them to destroy themselves now, and not get advanced enough to come after us. That's my logic behind it. You see what I'm saying?
So
it doesn't even make any sense.
Even though Clark went on to write, I think it was 2061, and then I think there's a 2000 or 2100, and there's several sequels, but the movie stopped.
But as a writer, I can tell you right now that even great writers like Mark Twain, even the best ones, and Arthur C. Clarke is one of the great ones. It's a hit or miss process, and you're only going to catch lightning in a bottle a few times. No matter how many times you write something, and sometimes it's just one time for an author.
Especially if you're deriving from earlier greatness, then.
A lot of times you're just coasting on your reputation. I actually wrote a song about that. Now I'm coasting on my reputation, but what I really deserve is humiliation, humiliation, humiliation. That's what he's doing. He's coasting on his past successes because he knows it's marketing. He knows there's going to be a hooked-in audience to check that out.
So you sang a little song for us, and music is almost equally important in 2001 as the visuals. What comments do you have on the music?
One thing I'd like to say is the impact of that when you saw aliens And you know, in other films, they use the music from 2001 as a little homage to it, and it works. It's powerful. You know, where Sigourney Weaver, they're playing that same music that David Bowman and Frank Powell were listening to as they're running around the centrifuge in.
Oh yeah.
And as the spaceship's floating through space.
It's a violin piece.
Yeah, it's a violin piece, a classical violin piece. And they use that at the opening of Alien. As I heard that, it just made my heart flutter. Oh, that's
that was familiar. Yeah.
No, but I recognized it right away, and it's like, yeah, we could put little Easter eggs of great works in there, pay homage to them, and make it work. You know, that's what you should do instead of doing these lame-brained rip-offs, you know, of a classic film, making lame-ass stories from it. Please, Hollywood, let's, you know, instead of pandering to the lowest common denominator, let's raise the bar. Let's be like Kubrick and say, I want to do the greatest work. I don't want to do the safest work. And that's the last line. I think we should end on that note.
Very good.
Okay, thank you, Josh.
Thanks so much, Tyler. I've enjoyed talking about 2001 with you.
I loved it too. We love the film. We absolutely love it.
Yes, please go out and see 2001 for the second, third, 100th time,
Okay,
or first time.